Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a really interesting topic to dig into today. You guys sent over a bunch of stuff on cancel culture
Oh yeah.
and this whole idea of the coalition.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, so and what we've been looking at is kind of how cancel culture is like this collective kind of a withdrawal of support, right?
Yeah.
For public figures or institutions
Hmm.
when they do something or say something that people find objectionable. And a lot of this obviously plays out super publicly on social media.
Absolutely. I mean, it's almost like the main stage for these kinds of things these days, right?
Right. And it feels very, very new, but looking at the material you sent, it seems like it's
Well, it's not entirely new, I'd
yeah.
say. It's like, we've seen echoes of this kind of thing throughout history,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
But social media has definitely, supercharged it, given it a whole new dimension, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So for this deep dive, what we want to do is really understand these two ideas, right? Cancel culture and the coalition.
Hmm.
See how they overlap, how they're different, and what they mean for, America and how things work here, how we interact, all of that.
Yep.
Based on everything you sent over. You sent over articles and research, and we want to try to pull out some key takeaways for everybody today.
Absolutely. And there are some pretty surprising connections, wouldn't you say?
Oh, totally. Like, we're gonna look at how historical boycotts, compare to what's going on online.
That's a good one.
We're gonna explore how social media, is this like accelerant, right? It just makes things
Oh, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire sometimes. It's
yeah.
unbelievable how fast things can.
Totally, totally. We'll explain what the coalition is all about because that seems to be this
Yeah, actually
new
kind of player in the game, you could say.
right, exactly. And then we'll talk about the big picture, like what all this means, where it might be headed.
Yeah, the implications are pretty huge, I think,
Yeah.
for all of us.
Totally, totally. So are you ready to dig into this?
Oh, absolutely. I'm ready to go.
Okay, great. So one thing that stood out to me was, we think of cancel culture as this very internet age thing.
Right.
But it seems like the idea of, people being unhappy with something and then using that, to try to change things, to change behavior,
It's an old story, really.
yeah, it's not new.
Yeah, the sources you provided really highlight that. I mean, you look back, historical boycotts,
Right.
they were a major tool for social and political movements. I mean, for real change.
Oh, yeah. And you had a great example from the 1850s, right? With the
The abolitionist movement. Yeah, they were organizing these boycotts against any company they could find with links to slavery.
wow.
It wasn't just about, saying they disapproved. It was hitting them where it hurt their wallets, trying to, weaken the whole institution financially.
So it's like that collective economic action was a way to force change even back then.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? It wasn't about violence.
Right.
It was about, peaceful resistance, but still creating these real-world consequences.
Mm.
And that idea, that principle, it's still alive today, I think. In cancel culture, I mean, just in a different form.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So it's about hitting them in the pocketbook in a way. Like, we're not going to support you.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that idea has sort of, transformed over time.
Yeah, so taking that idea and moving forward in history, right? You've got the civil rights movement in the 1960s
Right, another powerful example.
and the Montgomery bus boycott, right?
Absolutely, that one's iconic.
That was huge, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, sparked by Rosa Parks' incredible courage, refusing to give up her seat.
Right.
It became this massive statement, a collective no to segregation and discrimination.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about, getting a seat on the bus. It was about, demanding justice and showing what people can achieve when they stand together.
Right, like they weren't going to back down.
Exactly. They were in it for the long haul, for real change.
Wow. So we've got these examples of, collective action and boycotts.
Right.
And the goal is to, push back against something that's wrong and that's unjust.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really important point to keep in mind as we talk about cancel culture today.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So how similar, how different are those things?
Well, the core idea is the same, right?
Yeah.
It's people coming together to say, hey, this is wrong and we're not going to stand for it.
Mm-hmm.
But the way it plays out now with the internet and social media, it's just
Yeah.
on a whole other level. The speed, the scale, it's just,
Oh, it's crazy.
yeah, it's like night and day compared to those earlier boycotts.
Totally. So the source material really highlights this idea of, technology, right? And especially social media.
Right.
And it's totally transformed how information spreads. Like things go viral.
Oh, in an instant.
in an instant.
Yeah.
And that impacts these movements, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like before, it might take weeks or months for news to travel. Now it's just bam, it's everywhere.
Totally.
And that means these calls for accountability, they can gain traction incredibly quickly.
Right, right. It can turn into a global conversation.
Exactly.
Overnight.
Overnight. And that can be powerful, right, for pushing for change, for raising awareness.
Right.
But it also means things can escalate really fast.
Yeah.
And sometimes, those conflicts, those polarizations, they just become even more visible.
Right. Yeah, because everyone can weigh in. Everyone has an opinion.
Exactly. And not all those opinions are, well-informed or nuanced.
Right, right. Okay, so social media is this huge part of it, right? Like, this is where cancel culture really plays out.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that. It's like the main arena.
Right. And the material talked about how, like, a controversial statement or a video
Oh, yeah. A video could be...
can just spread. And then there's hashtags, right? That become like these...
Yeah, like rallying cries. Digital rallying cries.
Right, right. And then all the likes and the shares and the comments, it's just...
Fueling the fire.
It's fueling the fire.
Yeah, and sometimes you see this, this small issue, maybe a misunderstanding or something,
Right.
and it just blows up. It's like, whoa, how did that happen?
Totally. And the material talked about how, like, social media contributes to these echo chambers. Right?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. It's like, people tend to follow and interact with others who share their views.
Right.
And within those little bubbles, opinions can become more and more extreme.
Yeah.
It's like they're reinforcing each other.
Right. So someone might join in on, like, canceling someone without even knowing the full story.
Exactly. They're just reacting to what their friends are saying, to the dominant narrative within their little group.
Right. And it's like a snowball effect, right?
Totally.
It just gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah. And that can be really dangerous, I think, because then you have this individual, right, facing this massive wave of criticism. Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they misspoke. But they're just getting bombarded.
Right. And the material also mentioned anonymity, right?
Oh, that's a big one. That anonymity online, it can embolden people to say things they wouldn't dream of saying in person.
Right, right. It's like they feel protected.
Exactly. And it can be really hard to hold people accountable when you don't even know who they are.
Right. Yeah. It's like, who's behind this?
Exactly. It makes it very murky,
Totally. And then the material talked about algorithms, too.
Oh, yeah. Those algorithms are sneaky.
Yeah.
They're designed to prioritize engaging content, things that get people clicking and commenting and sharing. And what's more engaging than, the good old-fashioned cancel campaign?
Right, because it provokes those strong reactions.
Exactly. So the algorithm sees that people are reacting, and it's like, boom, push it to the top of everyone's feed.
So it just gets more and more attention.
More and more attention, and the whole thing can snowball really fast.
Wow. So it's like this perfect storm, right? You've got the anonymity, the algorithms, and these echo chambers, and it all just feeds into itself.
Yeah, it's a recipe for things to spiral out of control sometimes.
Right, right. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
The source material also talks about this concept of the coalition. And, this seems to be a more recent term in activism.
Yeah, it's definitely gained a lot of traction in the last few years.
Right. So what exactly is the coalition?
So basically, it's this idea of different activist groups, right, with different focuses coming together, forming this united front. You have civil rights organizations, environmental groups, grassroots movements. They're all coming together, pooling their resources, working towards these shared goals.
So it's about power in numbers, right?
Yeah, that's part of it. But it's also about, recognizing that a lot of these issues are interconnected.
Right. Like you can't really separate, racial justice from environmental justice or economic justice.
Exactly. And I think that's what's driving the formation of these coalitions, this idea of intersectionality. It's like, we can't just focus on one issue in isolation anymore.
And the material we sent actually had a really good example of that, right? Like, how do you address racial justice without...
Right, without looking at environmental conservation, gender equality, economic reform. It's all connected.
Totally, totally. So what are the benefits of these coalitions? Like, why are they forming?
Well, I think one big advantage is solidarity. When different groups work together, they support each other.
Right.
They learn from each other. And that creates this really powerful sense of unity.
And you have all these different skills and resources, right?
Oh, absolutely. You have different networks, different areas of expertise.
Right.
It allows coalitions to tackle these complex problems that, one group might not be able to solve on their own.
Right. So it's like a more comprehensive approach. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think coalitions are also really good at getting media attention
Right.
because it's like, wow, look at all these different groups coming together.
It makes a statement.
Yeah, it makes a statement, and it's harder to dismiss them. It's not just one group with a narrow agenda. It's this broad coalition of voices.
Right, right. Okay, so we've got these coalitions forming to, try to change things for the better.
Hmm.
And we've got cancel culture as this, tool for social pressure.
Right.
But how do they actually relate to each other? I mean, it seems like a complicated relationship.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think it's fair to say that cancel culture can be a tactic that's used within coalition politics,
Mm-hmm.
as a way to hold people accountable,
Right.
but it can also create tension.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so tell me more about that.
Well, there are some people who see cancel culture as absolutely essential for social justice. They argue that it's a way to, target systemic injustice, to use the power of social media to force change.
Mm-hmm. Like we've seen how fast things can spread online, how quickly people can mobilize.
Exactly. And for some people, that's seen as a powerful tool for achieving political goals.
Right. But I can imagine that not everyone within a coalition would agree on that. Right.
Oh, absolutely not. That's where the tension comes in.
Okay, so what are some of the disagreements?
Well, different groups within a coalition might have different ideas about when it's appropriate to use cancel culture.
Mm-hmm.
Some might see it as a last resort, while others might be more quick to call for a boycott or a denunciation.
Right.
And remember how we talked about how fast information spreads online?
Yeah.
Well, that means these disagreements can escalate really quickly. And that can create divisions within a coalition, which obviously isn't good if they're trying to work together.
Right. It can undermine the whole effort.
Exactly. And then you have the added layer of cultural differences. Within a coalition, you might have groups from different backgrounds with different values,
Mm-hmm.
and their views on cancel culture might be shaped by those cultural norms.
Right. So what one group sees as holding someone accountable.
Another group might see as too harsh.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So it's like this balancing act, right?
Totally. It's about finding a way to work together
Mm-hmm.
while still respecting those different perspectives.
Right. And the material really emphasized that this isn't easy.
Oh, it's definitely not. It takes a lot of communication, a lot of understanding.
Right, right. Okay, so all of this leads us to a really important part of the conversation, which is the ethics of cancel culture.
Mm-hmm. It's a thorny issue.
It is.
The-
Because on one hand, the source material, it points out that cancel culture can be a way for marginalized voices to be heard,
Right.
to speak out against things like racism, sexism, all these injustices that have been, ignored for so long.
Absolutely. And for some people, it's about using social pressure to force those in power to listen, to change their behavior.
Right, right. But then the critics of cancel culture, they have some serious concerns, right?
Oh, yeah. And I think it's important to understand their perspective, too. They worry that it undermines things like due process and fair treatment.
Right.
It's like, someone gets accused of something,
Yeah.
and suddenly everyone's piling on, demanding that they be punished.
Mm-hmm. Without a chance to defend themselves.
Exactly. And sometimes the punishment, it can be really severe. Their reputation is ruined, their career is over.
Right, and it can happen so quickly.
So quick. It's like this instant trial by social media.
Right, and the source material talked about how that can create this chilling effect.
Oh, the chilling effect, yeah. It's like people become afraid to speak their minds because they don't want to get canceled.
Right, so it's like self-censorship.
Exactly. And that's not good for a healthy society.
Yeah.
Right? We need to be able to have open and honest conversations, even about difficult topics.
Right. So it's like, how do you balance those two things?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah. How do you hold people accountable without creating this climate of fear?
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
And I think it's a conversation we need to keep having.
Yeah, for sure. So to understand this more, it's helpful to look at some real-world examples.
Absolutely. Those examples can really bring things to life.
Right. And the source material had a few that I thought were really interesting.
Okay, yeah, let's hear them.
Okay, so one was J.K. Rowling.
Oh, yeah, that one was huge. A lot of debate around that one.
Yeah. So basically, she expressed some views on transgender issues that a lot of people found, transphobic. And it sparked this massive backlash online.
Oh, yeah. People were calling for boycotts of her books, her movies. Some even wanted her awards revoked.
Wow. So it was like a real-world example of cancel culture in action.
Absolutely. And it really showed how polarizing these issues can be.
Hmm.
When you had people who were really upset with her, and then you had people defending her right to free speech.
Right.
It became this whole debate about gender identity, about freedom of expression.
Yeah. Okay, so another example that the material talked about was Kevin Hart.
Oh, yeah, the Oscars controversy.
Yeah. So he was supposed to host the Academy Awards,
Mm-hmm.
but then some old tweets of his surfaced
Right.
containing homophobic content.
Mm-hmm.
And he faced this huge pressure to step down.
Yeah, and he did end up stepping down.
He did. So it brings up this whole issue of accountability for past actions, right? Like even if someone apologizes, even if they've changed.
Right. Should they still be held accountable for things they said or did years ago?
Right, especially when it's, permanently out there on the internet.
Exactly. And it's tricky, right? Because we also want to believe in people's ability to grow, to learn from their mistakes.
Okay, so the source material also brought up the hashtag #MeToo movement, which is really interesting.
Yeah, that's a powerful example. And I think it shows how these dynamics of public pressure can be used for good, too.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, with hashtag #MeToo, you had all these women coming forward, sharing their experiences of sexual harassment and assault, and it created this massive wave of public awareness and accountability. Powerful men were being called out for their behavior, and it led to some real changes in how we think about these issues.
Right. So it's like, it's not always a negative thing.
Exactly. It can be a way to shine a light on injustice, to hold people in power accountable for their actions.
Okay, so it seems like there's a lot of nuance to this whole thing, right? Cancel culture, coalitions.
Oh, and it's a nuance.
And it's not surprising that there's been this kind of, mixed reaction from the public.
Yeah, definitely. People have strong opinions about this stuff.
They do. So the source material mentioned a growing backlash against cancel culture. People saying that it goes too far, that it stifles free speech.
Right. And I think there's a legitimate concern there, We don't want to create a society where people are afraid to express their opinions.
Right. So how do you balance that, right? The need for accountability with the right to free speech.
It's a tough question. And I think it's one that we're still grappling with as a society.
Right. And the source material mentioned these counter movements that are popping up, right?
Oh, yeah. There are definitely groups out there who are actively pushing back against what they see as the excesses of cancel culture.
And they're advocating for things like free speech and, cautioning against this idea of online shaming.
Right. They're saying, hey, let's not be so quick to ostracize people. Let's try to have some dialogue, some understanding.
Right. And it's interesting because the source material also talked about how this is impacting the way we use social media.
Oh, yeah. We're seeing this shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are looking for alternative platforms where they can express themselves more freely without the fear of being canceled.
Right. So it's like people are looking for spaces where they can have these conversations without being shut down.
Exactly. They want more nuance, more room for different perspectives.
Right. So it's like cancel culture is forcing us to really rethink how we interact online, how we have these conversations.
I think that's a really good way to put it. It's forcing us to have these tough conversations about free speech, about accountability, about how we treat each other online.
Right. And the source material also talked about how this whole, backlash against cancel culture, it's kind of creating its own coalition, right?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I see what you mean. It's bringing together people from different backgrounds with different motivations, but they're united in their concern about cancel culture.
Right. And it's interesting because even though cancel culture is often about, pointing out injustice, it seems like it's also forcing us to think about, how we criticize, how we hold each other accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, okay, we want to call out bad behavior, but how do we do that in a way that's constructive?
Yeah.
That allows for growth, for dialogue.
Right, because the goal isn't just to punish people.
Right. It's about creating a more just and equitable society. Exactly.
Okay, so as we wrap things up, I'm curious, what do you think the future holds for all of this? For cancel culture, for coalitions, for how we interact online?
What? It's tough to say for sure, but I think these trends are going to continue to shape our society in really significant ways. We're going to keep having these debates about accountability, about free speech, and social media, it's not going away anytime soon, so it's going to keep playing a huge role in all of this.
Right. Do you think cancel culture will evolve?
I think it has to. I mean,
Okay.
it's clearly a powerful force, but it also has its flaws. I think we're already seeing some signs of that evolution, you know?
Oh, interesting. Like
Well,
what?
like we were talking about earlier, people are demanding more nuance, more dialogue.
Mhm.
I think we're going to see more emphasis on restorative justice, on giving people a chance to make amends.
Right, instead of just, canceling them outright.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think coalitions are going to play a big role in that too.
Yeah.
They could help to create these spaces for dialogue, for understanding. And ultimately, I think it's about finding a way to balance accountability with compassion.
Right, right. So it's like we can hold people accountable for their actions without, destroying their lives.
Exactly. And I think that's the kind of future we should all be striving for.
I agree. Okay, so before we finish up, let's just quickly recap what we've talked about today.
Sure.
So we started by looking at how historical boycotts kind of paved the way for modern cancel culture.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about how social media has totally transformed this whole landscape, right? It's made things so much faster, so much more intense.
Yeah, it's like a whole new game now.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then we explored this idea of the coalition and how different activist groups are coming together to try to make a bigger impact.
Right. Strength in numbers.
Exactly.
Mm.
But then we also talked about how cancel culture can be this source of tension within coalitions.
Yeah, because different groups might have different ideas about how and when to use it.
Right. And then we got into the ethical dilemmas, right? Like, how do you balance free speech with the need for accountability?
Mm-hmm. That's the big question.
It is. It is. And we looked at some real world examples like J.K. Rowling, Kevin Hart, the #MeToo movement.
Right. It's playing out all around us.
It is. And then we talked about how the public is reacting to all of this. Some people are really concerned about cancel culture, while others see it as a necessary tool for social change.
Right. It's a complex issue.
It is. So as we end our deep dive today, I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
All of these things we've talked about, cancel culture, coalitions, social media, they're all shaping how we interact, how we communicate, how we create change.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to think about how these dynamics are playing out in your own life, in your community, online, in your conversations with friends and family. Because these are powerful forces, and understanding them is crucial for navigating the world we live in today.
That's a great point to end on. It's something we all need to be thinking about.
Totally. So thanks for joining us for this deep dive,
Yeah, thanks for having me.
and we'll see you next time.